Right, this weekend I'm headed up to Tyndrum to start in the group start of the 2018 Highland Trail. The route is a 550-mile off-road mountain bike route through the Scottish Highlands. Starting at Tyndrum, it'll make its way up north, all the way up to around Assynt, and then back down, passing through Fisherfield Massif, before coming back and finishing in Tyndrum again. And terrain-wise, it's a bit of a mixture of everything, really. It's some small bits of tarmac, some gravel, some hard technical single track, and some which is just not rideable by anyone, and some fairly lengthy hiker bike sections going through all of that. And the idea is that you have to be completely self-sufficient through the whole time. Timer starts when you start, stops when you stop, so you can sleep and eat whenever you like, but the timer keeps running. Last year, I suppose there was an anxiety of whether or not I could do it in the first place. I'd never done anything quite that distance at that kind of pace before, and I guess my feeling was that I would endure it and I would get through it and I would probably never do it again. But I suppose, towards the end, I was kind of just kept on thinking about how I might do it better next time, and yeah, really was motivated to come back and do it again another year. It kind of put me in a different headspace than I thought might imagine. So yeah, here I am again. Initially, my intention was to come back and beat the time that I did last year, which was sort of about 4.5 days. But in reality, I don't know. I don't know if I've done quite enough preparation this time, so we'll see how it goes. I know. We'll go out later. Obviously, it's nice to try and go a bit lighter. And this year, I was really happy with the aluminium transmitter that I took last year. People ride this race on all kinds of different bikes. There was people on drop barred adventure bikes, all the way through to full suspension trail bikes. I really liked the sort of plus tired trail geometry of the transmitter, I suppose, because where I'm coming from as a kind of a mountain biker used to riding Nadgery UK trails, I really like the challenge of being able to ride stuff which maybe you probably shouldn't ride. The transmitter is brilliant for that. It kind of gives you that confidence and has the traction and the ability. So I was finding myself probably riding more sections than other people, and then I suppose that would make up for sort of slightly more drag on the kind of the tarmac sections. This year I'm going with a carbon transmitter, so hopefully a little bit lighter. The ride quality is that bit better as well, but mainly for the weight, obviously with hiker bike sections. And I've slimmed down my tyre on the front as well, just making that rolling speed a little bit better whilst keeping the comfort and the traction of the plus tyre on the back. Yeah, so the bar roll which I'm going with is the Tevaro 12 litre. I really like this bar roll. It's super tough, completely waterproof. I actually submerged this one last year when I fell off into a stream, and my sleeping kit stayed dry, so that's as good a reason as any to keep it. It attaches really securely onto the bars. Obviously, I'm using the Confucius bars on this occasion. I love the extra hand positions, and also the fact that when you're mounting a bar roll, it stays away and doesn't squash up your brake levers and everything like that. So the Tevaro has a bar roll and then the Fat Roo pouch on the front of that. Just to sort of start off, obviously with the Fat Roo, it's just that extra space for chucking other stuff which you might need to get handy. So first thing in there, I've got an overview map of the whole route, and I found this really useful last year, just with some timings and distances on. Just when you're navigating off a GPS, it can get a bit confusing, and you, especially when you're tired, you're trying to think about where the next town is or whatever like that. So a sort of a larger scale overview map. Then Also sort of other stuff easy to get to. This is where I kind of keep my first aid kit. Hopefully I'm not going to need this, but it's got all the kind of bits and bobs dealing with blisters or aches and pains, as well as some slightly more serious stuff. And obviously it wants to be relatively easy accessible. Along with other sort of bits and bobs like that, head torch. Definitely important is the mosquito repellent. Midges at this time of year can be pretty bad. Obviously it's a good motivation to keep moving, but when you do stop, you can get pretty clouded by them. And then importantly as well, as obviously we're running off a GPX track through the Garmin here, but if that did fail, or if the batteries ran out, or if for whatever reason I couldn't navigate off them, it's important to have kind of backup paper maps. So I've printed these out onto waterproof paper and just kind of keep them rolled up in the front there, because it's just a nice place where they fit. Then when it comes to the bar roll itself, I want to keep stuff in here that's relatively lightweight, but that's also quite soft and malleable, so that it's going to fill the space. It's not going to be sort of sticking out with jagged edges. So for that reason, it kind of makes the perfect place to put your sleeping kit. So it is possible to get in from either side. So if you wanted to get your tarp out just for sort of a particularly wet lunch stop or a bit of shelter, you could do that. But sort of primarily in there, sort of in my sleeping kit, this is one of the items which is sort of up for discussion still in my head. But the cloud cover down blanket, to couple together with my bivy bag, hopefully if the weather's looking good at this time of year, should be warm enough. And obviously you save a bit of weight and bulk by not taking a huge sort of winter sleeping bag. That one I'm actually using with a silk liner as well, and it stops some of the drafts coming in from where you've kind of buttoned it up, if you are kind of trying to stay a little bit warmer with the down blanket. Sleeping mat, I use the Numo. It is particularly lightweight and small, but it stays comfortable. I mean, I know some sort of ultra endurance racers will use ridiculously thin sleeping mats, but I figured that if you're lying down and you're not sleeping, then it's a bit of a waste of time. So I want to be trying to stay as comfortable as possible, and the full length Numo actually is pretty comfortable, whilst remaining pretty lightweight. And then bivy bag, hunker bivy bag. Personally, I use the sort of the larger size, the extra large one. It means that I can chuck everything, including the sleeping mat, inside, and I'm not feeling too squashed in. And then a rigged tarp. So this is already kind of hooked up with all the guy points that I want, alongside a set of pegs. I won't always use this, but obviously if there's pretty bad weather coming in, hooking it up, even if it's over a part of the bike, to give you that little bit of shelter, it is useful. Obviously, if you're kind of wanting to save time in terms of setup, if you can find something to sleep under, then that saves you that bit of time in setting up your camp. So I remember last year I was riding with another rider, Bob, and he pointed out a couple of large earth mover JCBs at the side of the road, and he reckoned they'd be pretty good to sleep under. So we got in our bivy bags under that. Actually, at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning, waking up when it was raining, it turned out that they were pretty bad, because all the water collected on the chassis of these diggers and ran down and then dripped directly onto my head. So that wasn't the best one, but I'd seen people sleeping in drainage pipes and all sorts. You tend to get a little bit feral in some of your choices, but you just got to see what comes at you from there. Right, so cockpit setup is probably probably more complicated than some of the trips that go on. Obviously, the kind of key fact in and around is a navigation device. we're navigating off a GPX file. It's important that you stick to the right route. Any straying from the route and you will get disqualified. So yeah, making sure you stick onto that. So for that reason, I've got a Garmin eTrex GPS, really choosing this one over anything else because of the battery life, and it will take sort of AA batteries, and so with a lithium ion battery set in there, you'll get sort of about 25 hours of run time, and it means that you can just replace the batteries rather than having to charge it up from a wire all the time. So you'll notice I've got this sort of ungainly water bottle on the front. That worked really well last year, and in part the reason for it is obviously you've got easy access to water all the time without having to stop or faff about. But it's also, as well as the kind of bladder system that I'm taking, it's another bottle which obviously you can put like a noon tablet or some kind of rehydration aid in there without kind of having to drink that all the time. So it's like an extra water bottle. I've got a light on the front, which is the Alpkit Hadron, and that goes through to a battery pack that's mounted in the frame bag. Coming to here, we've got the stem cell 2. So this is it's one of those things that you can just shove whatever it is that you need to hand in there. So that might be sun cream, or it might be lip salve, or more than likely it's going to be food and snacks and really whatever you can get along the way. One of the mistakes I made last time is I took tons of food and snacks with me, and I mean really we're heading out into probably what's some of the more remote terrain in Britain, but the reality of covering bigger distances is that you're more likely to come across shops and places where you can buy stuff. So even though the nearest shop might be 150 kilometers a day away, you're more than likely to kind of reach that in a day if you're doing sort of longer distances. So what I've found this year is that you can probably take less and replenish more rather than having to carry too much along the way. But this is great because you can just kind of keep eating on the run and not have to stop. It's also, you might be chucking arm warmers or anything straight into there to stop you having to faff around with the rest of your kit. And we've got the Fuel Pod 22 on here as well. So that's a great spot for camera and mobile phone, which obviously you kind of want near to hand. Doing a little bit of documenting of the experience. It's useful to have that straight in front of you. I was finding I was taking quite a lot of pictures from the saddle last time. Certainly when you hit a bit of tarmac or something, you might be able to take some pictures. So yeah, and obviously again, you can just chuck whatever rubbish or cereal bar wrappers or whatever else in there as well as you're going along. Well, yeah, so the frame bag, this was actually custom built for the aluminium transmitter last year. So you notice it doesn't quite fill the whole of the carbon transmitter frame, which is that little bit thinner and a bit longer. It actually leaves a really nice little spot for a rolled up inner tube in the front there. Hopefully I won't need that, but on last year's event, within 20 kilometers or so, I'd burst the front tyre of my tubeless setup, so I ended up having to run with an inner tube the whole time. So this year I'm taking 2 just to make sure, because it's one of those things that it's a long walk to a bike shop to get tubeless setups fixed. So in the frame bag itself, it's always good to be carrying kind of the weightier items in there. So really kind of to start with, sort of down low at the bottom of the frame, I'm going to be taking all my spares and tools. So all the kind of the usual stuff, like a kind of multi-tool, obviously a pump, doing a bit of weight saving by attaching your gaffer tape to the pump, so you don't have to take a whole roll, but you're still going to be able to fix all those bits that gaffer tape are good at fixing. Obviously a pretty comprehensive kind of multi-tool. You're going to need to fix anything that goes wrong on that kind of event. So it's easy to go over the top, and you can't always kind of predict everything that's going to happen. But little bags of bits and bobs, obviously brake pads. If the conditions aren't great, you can go through a good couple of sets of brake pads on a route like that. In fact, what you'll find across the whole bike is that tyres and drivetrain and things like that will wear in the same amount as you probably get in the normal half a year of riding will happen in a week or so on the Highland Trail. And then other bits and bobs, obviously tyre boots, the odd kind of rubber bands and a Jubilee clip just in case you're kind of fixing things, and a little pot of lube as well. Rather than taking anything too drastic, I find that the little sushi pots work quite well for storing a little bit of wet lube in there just to kind of keep the chain running. I do know someone that didn't take any lube on the last year's, and their chain suffered drastically for it, and they ended up having to kind of go off route to a bike shop to get some bits sorted. So on top of that, obviously I said that I've got another tube in there. I've got a patch kit for the Numo sleeping mat. Again, speaking from experience, they don't work quite so well when they've got a hole in them. So making sure you can fix that, because otherwise there's not going to be too much sleep going on. I've got the Bosun bike light, which I've actually adapted, that goes on my helmet as a helmet light. So that's kind of my two light sources. And then trusty zip ties. You can't go anywhere without some zip ties, and also down in the bottom there I've got a couple of spare spokes as well. So really trying to be as self-sufficient as possible without kind of going too much over the top in terms of how much weight that you're carrying. And then in the top section, this one it's pretty easy accessible. What I tend to do is kind of fill this with whatever food that I'm eating at the time, along with a few other bits and pieces. It also is where I keep my stove set up. So in here, I'm using a Mai Tai mug with a Krakow small stove and a small gas canister. Now I ummed and ahed about taking a stove last year. And it really, for me, the self-sufficiency of being able to kind of stop when you want to stop and go when you want to go did make a big difference. And whilst the group that I was riding with on the loop on the way back, they all stopped at the Oracle Bridge Hotel. Because they knew that they needed to get to Ullapool the next morning to resupply on food. And they were stopping at sort of 8 o'clock at night, and I felt like I still had something in me, and I kind of realised that I had my sort of emergency food stuffed into the bottom of my seat pack, and I did have my stove. So I kind of did a bit of a calculation in my head and realised that I didn't need to stop in Ullapool, which meant that I carried on, and I got through sort of Ullapool way before any of the shops opened, and got across Fisherfield without having to make that stop, and for me that put a massive advantage on, and kind of got me under sub 5 days, which wasn't really something that I thought I was going to be able to do last year. So for the extra little bit of weight, personally I felt like it was a huge advantage. So I'm repeating the same again this year. I'm taking the stove. It also just means, I get to kind of stop and have a coffee in some really nice places rather than having to kind of be opportunistic about finding a cafe. And ultimately, it's all about enjoying it as well. And if we're not out there to enjoy it, then why are we? Other bits and bobs, carrying a selection of tea bags. This is, that kind of gets me on through alongside some rehydration. And then, all importantly, a midgie head net. Like I said before, they can be pretty bad up in the Highlands, and just being able to cope with them whatever way you can. I didn't really want to leave that behind. Also in here, I've got a lamprey, which obviously is a light, but more importantly is a battery charger. So I can just keep the batteries on my phone and my iPod topped up over the time that we're away. Well, this is the bit that's probably changed most from last year, and that's kind of based around the fact that I'm taking a dropper seat post with me this year, and that's mainly because with the Exo Rail and the new Koala 7, you can run a dropper seat post at the same time as carrying kit on the back. So specific bits, either whether it's sort of dropping into Fisherfield or coming off the top of Torridon, there was definitely sections last time where as a trail rider, I really wanted to ride with my weight out of the back, but obviously with the seat pack on, having to keep your seat up, you're not going to stop and try and adjust things. So I'm looking forward to using this this year, and it looks like a really strong sort of stable setup, and pretty simple at the same time. So you'll notice that I've got the spot tracker strapped to the top of this. Everyone who's riding the Highland Trail race has to have a spot tracker so that they can be followed on the track leader's site. And it kind of allows for a bit of a spectator sport going on with it, and obviously that needs a kind of decent view of the sky. So it fits quite nicely actually on the Koala 7. There's a couple of loops which are just spaced the correct distance apart. And then inside here, I'm taking stuff which I probably don't have to get at until probably when I stop. Obviously it's not the easiest place to get to whilst you're riding along, but good for sort of the kind of nighttime stuff. So first things first is a down jacket or warmer jacket. So I'm using the Katabatic, which is a synthetic down. This is one of my favourite bits of kit. It's probably a little bit overkill for spring on the Highland Trail, but I'd rather have something that's kind of a little too warm than not warm enough. Certainly if something goes wrong, I want to make sure that I'm kind of I'm keeping myself safe. So Katabatic goes in there, and then I've got my dry bag just with some of the kit that I'm going to be using to sleep in, and just making sure that stays as dry as possible, because you never know quite what will happen, whether you fall in a river or something like that. But as long as you keep some kit warm and dry, then you've always got that little mantra in your head saying at some point today I'm going to be warm and dry. So really just a kind of a selection of merino base layers, but a key thing that I took last year and it really worked well for me was some waterproof socks. Some people hate these things and some people love them, but I found that when you're riding all day and your shoes have got wet, and there's certainly a few river crossings where your shoes will get wet, being able to put on some dry socks that then when you put them back in those wet shoes aren't going to instantly get wet again, that really saves the condition of your feet. And seeing some people's feet at the end of last year's Highland Trail was definitely something to be desired, whereas I guess mine stayed in pretty good condition, and I kind of put that down to a sort of a spare set of dry waterproof socks. And then it's kind of spare emergency food rations. I said earlier how that kind of helped me out. Really like the fire pot meals made down in Dorset. I've never really been a huge fan of the kind of boil in the bag kind of outdoor ration style food, but this stuff is proper food, and it tastes proper, and it gives you that kind of energy kick. But more importantly, it's super easy to get ready, so it doesn't take you too long. You're just sitting there boiling some water, and then some extra kind of emergency rations, just to kind of keep me going if things really do go wrong. Very minimal wash kit, pretty much just sort of toothpaste, toothbrush in there, which is keep that hygiene going. And then stuck down here right at the very bottom is a pair of Parallax waterproof trousers. Now I probably wouldn't ever ride in these unless things were really, really bad, but definitely when you stop, having a kind of windproof, waterproof layer that you can sit down on wet ground with and not get wet. And also, obviously, if something goes a little bit wrong and you're having to having to go, you know, back on the train or something like that, it's useful to have a lightweight set of trousers. And the Parallax are actually, you know, just about comfy enough that you can kind of wear them and not really feel like you're wearing waterproof trousers. So they kind of stay stuffed down at the very bottom. Rather than carrying a camelback or something like that, I've avoided sort of wearing a rucksack. I did this last year and it worked really well to use a kind of a bum bag instead of a rucksack. And really my reasoning for this is that when you're kind of stopping to put on and take off layers a lot of the time, and you might, again, not want to be spending too long doing that if you want to put on a waterproof layer, being able to just stop on the bike and swing on a waterproof jacket. So for me, I'll have my Gravitas in here, being able to kind of just unzip that straight away and chuck it straight on without having to take a rucksack off and put it back on. That just felt to me like a little bit more streamlined, but you know, it's useful to have stuff that you are carrying on your person. So you know, whether that's just kind of wallet, so that when you jump off outside a petrol station and walk straight in, you don't kind of forget that you've left your wallet on your bike. And just really any other old bits and pieces. On top of that, I've got a kind of hydration system in here, with the option of inserting a water filter sort of halfway through the hose. Now, I forgot this last year, and I thought about it a few times. And the thing is, up in the Highlands, there's plenty of water, and a lot of it's really good to drink. And you know, it wasn't a problem refilling, but it was also, you kind of had to wait until you found a decent water source, and sometimes that meant kind of riding a fair bit of distance without having the kind of the hydration that you needed. So I decided to add it again this year, just so it means that I've got a bit more options in terms of which water source I use to refill. And then sort of last but not least, stuff like arm warmers, things that you can adapt your kit for riding. Just, you know, being able to put things on, take things off, dead simply. That all kind of stays stuffed in here as well. The thing is, you know, everyone's got their different way of doing things, and for me, really, it's kind of a dynamic process. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the weather forecast, like right up until the point at which I get in my van to drive up there. I know there'll be people that go with a lighter weight setup, and I know there'll be people that go with kind of like more kit and heavier setup. Really, for me, it's just about kind of trying to find that balance, and ultimately, you know, the thing which I loved about the Highland Trail is that it's, you know, it's proper hard technical mountain bike riding in places. So for me as a mountain biker, you know, I want to enjoy that riding. You know, I want it to bring a smile to my face. So any kit that I can go with that kind of helps me enjoy the trail, rather than just seeing it as a kind of some kind of brutal self-punishment. I hopefully will go and just enjoy riding in Scotland for a few days with a bunch of other people who I'd otherwise not get to meet. So I mean, that's the beauty of the Highland Trail. At the end of the day, is it's this beautiful atmosphere of crazy people that have come from all over the place, and that share this kind of this love of bike packing in remote places. And so yeah, excited to go up and do it all again.